The diner was loud that afternoon, plates clanging, coffee being poured, a dozen conversations running over each other in the way they do in a place where people come to eat fast and leave. Dean Martin was in a booth near the window. He had not planned to be there long. He had a meeting in an hour. He had a glass in front of him that was not alcohol, which was something people who did not know him well always found surprising. He was watching the room the way he always watched rooms, without appearing to watch anything at all. The booth was unremarkable. The window looked out onto a street that had nothing particular to recommend it. There was nothing about the afternoon that announced itself as important. Then he heard it, a woman's voice, flat, tired. 3 words, no money, no food. And then a silence where a child's voice had been a moment before. What happened next was not something Dean planned. It was not something he thought through. It was not a gesture designed for anyone to see. What it revealed about who he actually was has never been fully told. It was 1963. America was spending money it had and money it was about to have, and the distance between those two things was not yet visible to most people. The economy was moving. Television was everywhere. The entertainment industry was at a kind of peak that people who lived inside it could feel but not quite name. The sense that the machine was running, and the machine was good, and the machine was going to keep running for a long time. Dean Martin was 45 years old. He was between pictures. His television work was picking up, and his records were selling, and he was, by any external accounting, a man without serious problems. The Rat Pack was in full operation. Frank called the shots, and Dean carried the room, and Sammy held everything together with a work ethic that made the rest of them look idle. Dean was not idle. He was just quiet about his effort in a way that Frank, who needed people to see the effort, never was. He had grown up in Steubenville, Ohio. His family did not have money in the way that money provides options. They had enough and sometimes not quite enough. And Dean had learned early what the line between those two things felt like when you were standing on it. He had worked from the time he was old enough to work. He had hustled. He had taken jobs that did not suit him and done them until something better appeared, and sometimes something better did not appear for a long time. His father was a barber. His mother kept the house and kept the family and kept things together in the way that women in those households kept things together, through a kind of management that was never acknowledged as the skill it was. Dean watched his parents work. He watched what the work produced and what it did not produce. He absorbed, without being told, the relationship between effort and outcome in a world that did not always honor that relationship fairly. By 1963, he was 45 years old and famous in a way that Steubenville could not have predicted for him. The kind of famous that changes what a room does when you walk into it. The kind of famous that means people adjust their behavior in your presence without realizing they are adjusting it. He had been inside that fame for long enough to understand what it was and what it was not. What it was not was a substitute for the things that actually mattered. What it was not was a reason to stop paying attention to the room. You know that feeling when you are in a room, and you can see that someone needs something, and you also know that nothing in the room is going to move to help them. That specific helplessness, that particular weight of watching a situation and knowing you are the only one who has clocked it. Dean felt that in rooms more often than people understood. He noticed things. He noticed people. He noticed the ones who were being overlooked. That afternoon in the diner, he noticed a boy. The boy was 7, maybe 8. He was sitting across from a woman who was clearly his mother. She was young in the way that exhaustion makes people look young, the stripped-down quality of someone who has been running on less than she needed for a while. Her coat was clean but thin. Her coffee sat in front of her, and she had not touched it. The boy had asked for something to eat. Dean could not hear the exact words, but he heard the mother's answer, flat, automatic. The answer of a woman who had given it before and who had stopped expecting it to feel any particular way. No money, no food. The boy went quiet, not crying, not asking again. Just quiet in the specific way that children go quiet when they have understood something they were not supposed to have to understand yet. The waitress moved past their table without stopping. 3 other people at nearby tables did not look up. Dean looked up. He watched for a moment. The boy had his hands in his lap. He was not looking at the menu. He was looking at the table. He was not looking at the table to see anything on it. He was looking at it the way a child looks at a fixed point when they are absorbing information they did not ask to receive. The mother's hands were round her coffee cup. She was not drinking. She was holding it. There is a specific kind of stillness in a person's hands when they are holding something not for warmth or for the coffee, but because having something to hold gives the hand somewhere to be. Dean had seen that stillness before, not in a famous room, not in a room anyone would write about. In rooms in Steubenville, Ohio, where his family had lived the particular life of people who work hard and land where they land, which is not always where they intended. He had seen his mother's hands around a cup. He had known, from those hands, everything he needed to know about that day and what it contained. Here is what nobody ever talks about: the moment between seeing something and deciding to do something about it. That gap. Most people live in that gap and never cross it. They see, they register, they feel the weight of it for a few seconds. And then something else happens, and the weight shifts, and the moment passes, and they are still in their seat, and the world has moved on. Dean did not live in that gap, but he also did not move right away. He sat with it for a moment. He watched the boy. He watched the mother. He watched her hands around the coffee cup she was not drinking. And something settled in him that was not new. It was a recognition, an old one. He had been that boy, not exactly, not in every detail, but in the essential thing, in the knowledge of what it felt like when the answer to a basic need was no. He had been there. In Steubenville, in rooms where the heat was low and the food was accounted for down to the last portion. He had sat in places and known that the thing he wanted was not available, and that there was nothing to do about it except accept the fact and go on. He had gone on. He had found his way out through luck and talent and a stubbornness that he never advertised. But he had not forgotten the rooms. What nobody knew about Dean Martin, not really. Not the people who wrote about him, or the people who managed him, or the people who sat across from him at dinner and thought they were getting close to the real thing, was how much of his attention went outward. Frank Sinatra's attention was always fundamentally organized around Frank. That was not a criticism. It was an architecture. Frank's whole output, the music, the performances, the famous loyalties and famous fallouts, was generated by a man at the center of his own field of gravity. Everything orbited him. Dean was different. Dean's attention moved. It landed on other people. It noticed the room. It picked up the details that did not concern him and filed them away, and sometimes, in moments like this one, acted on them. That was the part the camera never caught. The casual image, the glass, the half smile, the effortless delivery, those things were real. But underneath them was a man who was paying close attention to everything around him at all times. He just did not show the attention in ways that made people uncomfortable. Why does a man who has everything walk toward a situation that has nothing to do with him? What pulls him across that gap when most people stay on their side of it? And what was it about that particular afternoon that made this the moment? The waitress came to Dean's table. She was efficient and pleasant, and she was doing her job with the focused energy of someone who had a full section and no time to slow down. Dean ordered. He asked a few questions about the menu with the unhurried patience of a man who was not in any particular hurry. He made a small joke that made her laugh. Then he leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. He asked about the woman and the boy 2 tables over. The waitress glanced across. She said she did not know them. They came in sometimes. The woman usually just had coffee. Sometimes she brought the boy, and he sat there while she had her coffee, and then they left. Dean nodded. He looked at his own table for a moment. Then he said something to the waitress that she would repeat to people for decades. He said it without theater, without the pause that comes before a line a man has rehearsed. He said it the way you say a thing that is obvious to you and that you assume will be obvious to the person you are saying it to. He said, "Bring them whatever they want, put it on my bill, and do not tell them it was me." The waitress looked at him. He looked back at her steadily. She nodded and walked away. Most men would have stopped there. Most men would have done the calculation and decided that the gesture itself was enough. A meal paid for, a problem solved, the quiet satisfaction of a good act completed without anyone having to know. But Dean Martin was no tea most men. What he did after that, in the next 20 minutes, while the food was being brought, and the boy was eating, and the mother was sitting across from him with a different expression on her face, was something the waitress noticed and could not quite explain when she told the story later. He watched them. Not obviously. Not in the way that makes a person feel observed. In the way a man watches something that matters to him. Carefully. Without looking away. If stories like this are the kind that stay with you, subscribe. We find the moments that nobody filmed. The ones that happened in ordinary places and left marks that lasted longer than anyone expected. Stay with it. The food came out fast. The waitress set it down in front of the boy, and the mother, with the efficiency of someone who had been told to make it seem normal, to not make an event of it. The mother looked up. She had not ordered. She knew she had not ordered. She looked at the plates and then at the waitress. The waitress said it had been taken care of. She did not say by whom. She smiled in the way of a person delivering good news who has been asked to deliver it without explanation. The mother sat with that for a moment. The boy had already reached for the bread. The mother looked around the diner, not frantic, measured. The look of a woman trying to understand what had just happened and who was responsible for it. Her eyes moved across the room. They passed over Dean's table. He was looking out the window. He did not look back at her. She sat for another moment. Then she looked at her son eating. She picked up her coffee. You know that moment when someone does something for you that they did not have to do, and they do it in a way that does not require you to feel grateful in any performed or public way, in a way that gives you the thing you needed without taking anything from you in return, without making you the recipient of a charity that you have to carry, just the thing itself delivered cleanly and then the door closing behind it. That is what Dean gave her. Not a story she would have to tell, not a debt she would have to account for, just a meal, just the ordinary act of one person making sure another person ate. What happened after that? When Dean paid his bill and stood to leave, was something a few people in the diner saw but did not fully register until later, when the waitress started telling the story and they began to piece together what they had watched. He stopped at the boy's table on his way out. He did not pull up a chair. He did not make a production of it. He crouched down so he was at the boy's eye level. which is what adults do when they want to talk to a child without making the child feel small. He said something. The boy looked at him. The mother looked at him. A few people nearby heard fragments. The word school. Something about a specific thing the boy liked. Though they could not make out what, the boy answered, not shyly, with the directness that children use when they are talking to an adult who is genuinely asking rather than performing a question. Dean listened to the answer. Then he asked something else. The boy answered again. The mother sat across from them with her hands flat on the table now, not holding anything. Her face was doing the careful thing that faces do when the unexpected arrives and the person does not yet know what category it belongs to. Dean nodded at something the boy said. He said one more thing. The boy looked at him the way children look at adults who have just said something that landed in the right place. He stayed for less than 2 minutes. Then he stood up. He put his hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. He said something to the mother. One sentence, direct, quiet. The couple in the corner could see his mouth moving, but the room was too loud to resolve the words. The mother looked at him for a moment. The careful expression shifted into something else. Not gratitude in the performed sense. Something closer to recognition. She nodded. Dean walked to the door. He did not look back. Here is what nobody talks about. In that diner on that afternoon, there were people who recognized him. 2 of them. A couple in a corner booth who had looked up when he came in and had registered who he was and had gone back to their lunch. They watched what happened. They watched the whole sequence. The quiet conversation with the waitress. The food going to the table. Dean stopping at the boy's seat on his way out. They did not approach him. They did not say anything. One of them told the story years later. She said she had not said anything because she felt, in the moment, that saying something would have broken it, would have turned into a thing that needed to be acknowledged and filed under famous person does good deed and moved on. She said it did not feel like that. It felt like something private, like watching a person be exactly who they were when nobody was watching. Except she was watching. And Dean Martin was exactly who he was anyway. Stay with it. The waitress talked to the woman before she left. Not at length, just enough to ask if everything was all right. The woman said yes. She said the food was good. She looked down at the boy, who had eaten everything and was drawing something on a paper napkin with a pen he had found in his coat pocket. The waitress asked if she needed anything else. The woman said no. She said thank you. She said it the way people say thank you when they mean something larger than the word contains, but do not have another word to put in its place. They left 20 minutes after Dean did. The waitress cleared the table. She stood there for a moment with the dishes in her hands. She had been working in that diner for 6 years. She had seen a lot of things in that time. She had seen the full range of how people treated other people in close quarters over food and coffee and the particular stress of a Tuesday afternoon. She had not seen that before. She told her husband that night. He asked who it was. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. He was a man who chose his words with the economy of someone who had found that fewer words usually meant better ones. He said he was not surprised. She asked him what he meant. He said that some people are the way they seem, and some people are more than they seem. He said he had always had a feeling about Dean Martin that went beyond the voice and the glass and the television persona. He said that a voice carries more than melody. It carries a person's relationship to what they are saying. And Dean's voice, he said, had always sounded like a man who meant what he was singing, not performing the meaning, having it. She thought about that for a long time afterward. Dean Martin did not talk about that afternoon, not in any interview that was preserved. not in any conversation that made it into the record. The story survived through the waitress, and through the couple in the corner booth, and through a chain of ordinary tellings that carried it across decades, without any central authority to confirm or correct it. What that means, in practical terms, is that the details shifted. The year moved around depending on who was telling it. The diner had different names in different versions. The age of the boy varied. The sentence Dean said to the mother as he left was reported differently in every account. What did not shift was the shape of it, the structure, the specific quality of what had happened. Nobody who told the story made Dean into a hero of it. They told it the way you tell a thing you witnessed, with the particular flatness of a person describing something that was real. The couple in the corner booth talked about it on the drive home. She told the story first. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he was not surprised, which she had not expected. He said there were people who were one thing in public and another thing when the camera was off, and there were people who were the same thing all the way through. He said he had always had a feeling about Dean and Martin that suggested the second category. She asked him what kind of feeling. He said the kind you get from a voice, that a voice carries more than melody. It carries a person's relationship to what they are saying. And Dean's voice, he said, had always sounded like a man who meant it. She thought about that for a long time. The story spread the way stories spread before the world had a mechanism for speed. One conversation to another, not as a headline, not as a verified event with sources named, as a thing that had been witnessed by people who had no reason to invent it and no particular stake in its circulation. It moved through the city and then, over years, past the city, carried by the ordinary traffic of people who had heard something and passed it on. Every version was slightly different. The year varied. The diner was on different streets in different accounts. The boy was 5 in some versions, 9 in others. What did not vary was the sequence. What did not vary was the instruction Dean gave the waitress. What did not vary was the fact that he stopped at the table on his way out. Some things survive intact because they happened, and the shape of how they happened does not change in the retelling. If a man wanted to be seen doing a good thing, he would not have told the waitress to keep his name out of it. He would not have made sure the mother could not identify him. He would not have left before the food arrived so he could not be thanked. He would not have said whatever he said at the boy's table in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. A man who wanted credit does not engineer the situation to prevent credit from reaching him. Dean had done that, with the careful attention of someone who understood that the moment the recipient knows who helped them, the dynamic shifts. The meal becomes a story about the famous man. The child becomes a detail in someone else's narrative. The thing that was given becomes the thing that was given by him. He removed himself from the equation. That was the whole point. Years passed. Dean worked. He made pictures that people liked and some that people did not. He did the television show for 9 seasons and built something on that set that the people who worked on it talked about for the rest of their professional lives. He lost his son Dino in 1987, and the loss reorganized something central in him that did not reorganize back. He grew quieter in the years after, not depressed in any clinical sense that people who saw him described. Quieter, more interior, as though the volume on the part of him that engaged with the world had been turned down a few degrees, and he had accepted that as the new setting. He still ate at the same restaurants. He still sat in the same booths. He still watched rooms. The people who served him in those years, the waiters, the maitres, the bartenders who had known him for decades, talked about him after he was gone in a consistent way. They talked about a man who was present, who noticed them, who asked questions and waited for the answers instead of talking through them, who tipped well not as a display, but as a quiet accounting between himself and what he understood about work. One waiter at his regular restaurant told a reporter that Dean had asked him once, in the last year of his life, how his daughter was doing. The waiter had mentioned his daughter months before, once in passing. Dean had not only remembered, he had remembered which thing the daughter was dealing with, and had followed up on that specific thing. The waiter said he had thought about that for a long time afterward, about what it means when a person holds the details of your life in their attention, about how rare that is, about how that quality, in a man who had every reason to be entirely occupied with his own magnitude, was the thing that stayed with him long after the fame and the performances and the recordings had settled into their permanent places in the archive. Nobody knows if he did what he did in that diner again. Nobody knows if he walked into another situation and saw another version of that boy and did the same thing or something like it. He was not the kind of man who kept a record of those moments. He was not the kind of man who would have wanted a record kept. It never happened on paper, and now it never will. This is not a story about a meal. This is a story about what a person chooses to do with what they remember. Dean Martin remembered Steubenville. He remembered the specific texture of not enough, the particular arithmetic of a household where every number was counted and some numbers did not add up. He carried that memory not as damage and not as a sentimental attachment to his origins, but as a kind of calibration, a way of understanding what the world looked like from inside a situation where the basic things were not available. Most people who come from that and arrive at wealth and fame use both of those things to put distance between themselves and the memory. The distance is understandable. It is protective. What you survived you do not always want to revisit. Dean did not put distance. He kept the calibration active. He let it inform what he noticed and what he did about what he noticed. The boy in the diner was not a cause. He was not a symbol. He was not a story Dean told about himself later. He was a child who was hungry and whose mother could not cover it that day. And Dean Martin happened to be in the room. And Dean Martin was a person who, when he was in a room and something like that was happening, did not look down at his table. Think about someone in your life who acts without needing to be seen acting, who does the thing and then steps back and lets the thing be the thing, rather than a story about them doing the thing. That quality is rare. It is rarer than generosity, which is common. It is rarer than kindness, which most people can access when the situation is easy. The specific discipline of giving something without remaining attached to having given it is something most people never develop, not because they are selfish, but because they have not thought about the difference. Dean had thought about it, or he had arrived at it through instinct and experience, which amounts to the same place. Generosity is not about the amount. Meaning to help and actually helping without cost to the person being helped are not the same thing. The people we fail are rarely failed in dramatic moments. They are failed in the small moments. The moment when the waitress walked past the table, the moment when the people in the corner booth looked down at their food, the moment when everyone in the room decided that what they were seeing was not their business. Dean decided it was his business. That decision cost him nothing visible and nothing he chose to measure. It changed something for a boy and a woman on an afternoon in 1963. What it changed and how long the change lasted and whether the boy ever knew where the meal came from are questions that have no answers. Dean never waited around for answers. One diner, one afternoon, one boy going quiet at a table, when a grown woman said the words no one should have to say to a child. One man in a booth near the window who heard it and made a decision so fast it did not look like a decision at all. No cameras, no audience, no record he kept or wanted kept. Dean Martin never explained himself. That was who he was. If stories like this are what you come here for, subscribe. The playlist is waiting. These are the stories that matter. The ones that happened when nobody was filming. The ones that survived because someone remembered and cared enough to pass it on. There was a moment after Dean left the diner and before he reached his car. When he stopped on the sidewalk, he stood there for a few seconds. He was not looking at anything specific. The street was doing what streets do in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, moving, indifferent, full of people going somewhere else. A city that did not know what had just happened inside one of its ordinary rooms and would not have paused for it if it had. Inside the diner, a boy was eating. Dean put his hands in his coat pockets. He walked to his car. He drove to his meeting and arrived on time and conducted himself with the ease and precision that everyone in the room expected of him. The meeting ended. He shook hands. He left. He did not mention the diner. That was Dean. That was the one afternoon that never really ended.